Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. I'm Dr. Chris Schaefer, Dean of University Libraries here at Troy. Thrilled to see so many people from the community. This is great. We have with us today Dr. Lauren Bairnsfather. She is CEO of the Anne Frank Center USA. She received her doctorate from the University of Texas at Austin, along with I think he was a little bit ahead of her, one of our history professors, Dr. Tim Dothan. So we have a reunion of sorts. She is a board member of the the Association of Holocaust Organizations, which is how we met. She previously served at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. Lauren is here today because of two grants written by Stephanie White, who is now streaming this, we hope. This is a first time. So we had grants of $5,000 from the Alabama Holocaust Commission. In the audience is Dr. Dan Puckett, who is the chair of the Alabama Holocaust Commission, also a history professor. I'm also a member of the commission. And Alabama Humanities Alliance also gives a grant in support of this event, which did happen last night in Dothan, here today, tomorrow Montgomery, and the next day Birmingham. So it's a whirlwind visit. And with that, Dr. Bairnsfather.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Can you hear me? May have to. Yes, you hear me? Okay, good. That's always a concern. And you hear about it later. So thank you all for having me. What a lovely crowd. I want to thank the Alabama Holocaust Commission and the Alabama Humanities. What's the third word? Alliance. Thank you. Troy University. Chris Schaefer, who has been my host for the last couple of days, feeding me well, if anyone is worried. My friend Dan Puckett and Stephanie White, thank you for making this possible and all your behind the scenes work. And for streaming now, so people can be watching this if they can't be here in person. So I developed the corpus of this talk in 2024, around this time of the year. So after October 7th of 2023. And this was not the first time that I was thinking about the need to take anti-Semitism seriously. But it was really striking to me that even on October 8th, we started to see denial of what had happened, even though it was filmed by the perpetrators, denial of what our own eyes were seeing. And my first thought was, we are seeing dehumanization of Jews before our very eyes. I have been teaching the Holocaust or working in Holocaust museums for nearly 30 years, and seeing that was so shocking to me. I thought, we're so dehumanized. We can't now humanize this story. We need to rehumanize this story. So I'm going to talk to you about this word that I made up and this concept I have of rehumanization. So I think that is what's called for now. So I thought the way we're going to do this, I am teaching the long history of the Jewish people, 4,000 years of exile and migration. But 2 years on, I'm feeling like it's not quite enough. And I've observed the reason that it has been so hard to get people to take anti-Semitism seriously, so hard to counter it in our lives in real time. Two reasons. One, it is really hard to define. And you may all be following debates about how do you define anti-Semitism? Are certain governments endorsing one definition, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? Does it say enough? Does it tell you everything we need to know? Should it mention Israel or not? All of these debates about that. Nobody really has agreed on a single definition of anti-Semitism. The second reason that it's so hard to counter is that people don't believe it's real. I'll let you sit with that idea. I'm not sure how that hits you. In my experience, even the best intentioned people are having a hard time understanding how this can be a real thing. Indeed, the history of the Jewish people across 4,000 years or so is one of movement and wandering. And in Hebrew, they say na v'nad, movement and wandering. We are a people shaped by exile and migration. That's our history. Persecution and genocide have driven Jews from their homes all over the world. And that's an important thing, that this history is lost. Many people don't know this, even Jewish people don't understand how many places we lived around the world, the pressures that drove us from places, the opportunities that pulled us to other places. It's all part of the story. But all of this leads us to right now in 2026, when nearly half of the Jews in the world live in Israel and nearly half live in the United States. Mm-hmm. From our populations all over the world, we have mostly now condensed in two places. So I'm going to talk about some things that are pretty difficult, and I'm going to talk about them in a very calm, dispassionate way. If it hits any of you in a way that it's difficult to hear, I won't be offended if you get up and walk out. I don't try to make people cry, even though you might have heard that there was an emotional response yesterday. We were talking about that a little bit. In the United States, Jews are 2.5% of the population. So it is possible to be somewhere in the United States, and even likely in many places, where you will never meet a Jewish person. But in the world, we are only 0.2% of the population. We are a tiny minority. We are united by a common liturgy. And my friend, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers from the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, says that we have survived all these years being forced to move and wander because our religion is portable. And you've probably seen the scrolls of the Torah that contain our holy scripture. It's portable. People took it with them when they were forced to move out from place to place. In fact, the diversity of the Jewish people from this wandering with our common liturgy is another reason that it can be hard to identify and understand antisemitism. From 2015 until 2022, I served as executive director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. It was in that role that I met my friends who brought me here. On October 27th, 2018, I was at my house preparing to have company when I received a text that there was an active shooter at the Tree of Life. Does everyone remember the shooting at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh? Because it's pretty common now that people don't remember or didn't know about it. And I get that feedback. If you were in that community, it's an unforgettable, life-changing day. So there's one piece of that story that many people don't remember because we haven't talked about it enough. Does anyone in here watch The Pit? Got a couple of people who watch The Pit. So in an episode this season, and I haven't watched the most recent episode, so please no spoilers, but there was an episode this season that featured a storyline about the Tree of Life. And it actually foregrounded the thing that people are forgetting. So I was so happy to see it. The Muslim community in Pittsburgh got together and raised $300,000 to pay for all of the funerals of the 11 people who were killed that day. And so that is such a human thing and such a beautiful story that goes against everything that we're hearing all of the time. So anytime I talk about the Tree of Life, I talk about that. And it wasn't only the Muslim community that showed up, every faith community showed up from our whole region. It was as if that shooting at the synagogue happened to everyone. So when I talk about the fact that we can all come together across perceived difference, it's because I've lived that experience. I've seen it. I know it's possible. I was part of it. So that attack at the Tree of Life is part of a series of attacks that have happened around the country, around the world. We just saw one in Sydney, Australia, where there's a perpetrator who doesn't see Jews as individuals, but sees Jews as the Jew, an evil and pernicious group of people. And if you attack the Jew, something will be accomplished. So the attack on the Tree of Life, the perpetrator believed that Jews were bringing immigrants into the country to take jobs that were meant for him. That was his justification. The two young people who were killed outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum last May, that was to help the Palestinians. In every one of these cases, it's a delusional belief. And this is at the most extreme, but not all of this happens at the extreme. in recent years, I'm giving you a long introduction before I get to my beautiful pictures. In recent years, it's become clear that violence in Israel often translates to violence against Jews living outside of Israel. And this was true long before October 7th of 2023. What we're seeing is a new escalation. The old ways of understanding anti-Semitism don't work, even though I continue to teach them. As long as Jews are viewed as powerful puppet masters, as white colonists, many people find it difficult to recognize anti-Semitism as the vile and dangerous hatred that it is. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. So I'm going to take you on a journey that shows a number of maps. So we're going to travel around the world and watch migration patterns of Jewish populations. I always invite people in the audience to think about their own family stories when we look at the maps. It's a map of the Jewish diaspora. Diaspora means scattering, so we were scattered around the world. Ours was the first diaspora, there are others. But anytime I'm presenting, I know that you're going to see your family's pathways in these maps too. So please keep an eye out for that. And I'm looking forward to Q&A after this, so please be thinking about your questions. There are no bad questions. I'll be really excited to hear from you when I finish this. So we need to define anti-Semitism, and the reason I opened that way, it's a present danger right now, so I'm thinking about it a lot. But also, all of this migration is as a result of anti-Jewish belief, which has also evolved over thousands of years, preserving some elements of the oldest anti-Judaism, incorporating new elements as time goes forward. So both of these things are happening at once. Anti-Semitism is raging and people are fleeing or they're being forced to leave. And sometimes being forced to leave was luckier than staying. So this map shows our origins in Canaan. This is the Fertile Crescent. And we're not quite 4,000 years ago, but we'll say we're 4,000 years ago. These are tribes that moved around that area, and Canaan, which you see along the Mediterranean, is present-day Israel. So the Jewish people are the first Abrahamic faith. Abraham was our patriarch. Christianity followed, and then Islam in the same faith traditions. I talked about the stages of anti-Semitism across time. This is where it gets kind of complicated, and I think sometimes we lose the thread, we lose the point we're trying to make, but it evolved over time in response to what's happening around Jews. So this is covering about 2,000 years. So we begin with anti-Judaism, which is persecution of Jews based on religion, to put it in the simplest of terms. Then it becomes anti-Semitism. That is a word that was invented, and it happened after the Enlightenment. So after the Enlightenment in Europe, where it no longer became okay to persecute people for their religious beliefs, there was a lot of thought that went into thinking about other ways to persecute Jews. So if it can't be based on religion, but that tradition remained, this word anti-Semitism was invented specifically to persecute Jews. And it was a racial idea. So I have racial in quotes, as I always do. Race is a construct, right? But racism is so real. So I'm always really careful when I talk about how race is completely made up on a scientific basis, but it structures our society. And it structured this society too. So I'm talking about the 1800s forward. People were classified in certain ways. It's definitely affected practices in the United States. These ideas crossed the Atlantic. They animated political campaigns in Austria that influenced Adolf Hitler. So really the legacy of that stage, where I'm calling it anti-Semitism with a hyphen, is still with us. The racist beliefs that still structure a lot of society start there. But then we get to about 1900, and I'm going to show you in maps why this is Russian and then Nazi anti-Semitism. And now when you hear anti-Semitic beliefs, they often derive from the Russian Empire, where a book was published called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. Do people in the audience know about that publication? It was purported to be the minutes of a meeting of the elders of Zion who were planning world domination. So it talks about owning the banks, controlling the economy, controlling the government, the same kind of accusations that we still hear against Jews now in 2026. So that was in the Russian Empire, and we'll talk about the Jewish population there because that's an important part of the story. Then some of those ideas get incorporated into Nazi anti-Semitism. So the Nazis had the world domination idea. They also had the idea that Jews were racially inferior. So at the same time, in the eyes of the Nazis, Jews were all powerful, yet a pest that needed to be exterminated. And that brings us to now, where we still have a lot of neo-Nazism, if we want to look for it. But now we also have an evolving and new kind of anti-Semitism. Now we don't spell it with a capital S and a hyphen, because Semitism is not a real thing. And we understand that that's language that was imposed on us, basically. And we also have anti-Zionism. And I think this has become very confusing for people. I was asked a question about it just today. And so this new kind of anti-Semitism is conspiracy theories, like we learned from the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. Scapegoating. Jews have been blamed for everything that went wrong for thousands of years. So that scapegoating is carried across all of these eras. And I put white Jews in quotes. These are the recent accusations of Jews as white colonizers. And we can talk about that later if anyone wants to talk about that. But I have to include it in there because this has become one of the accusations that is lobbied against Jews now. We don't need to read this, but I think we can share this presentation, and I know it's being recorded. One reason that I like to talk about anti-Semitism, I always say, is I'm not asking you all to care about me, I'm asking you to care about you, because anti-Semitism is a threat to everyone. Whether it's a direct threat, I was saying earlier, the attack on the Tree of Life, first responders were injured. Sometimes there are attacks on places that are perceived to be Jewish that are not Jewish. There's also the fact that when anti-Semitism is rising, it shows that you're in an unhealthy society. So there's a danger to other minority groups. There's a danger to everyone. It goes hand in hand with what we're seeing now, with the inability of people to talk to each other and come together. This is a supreme way of othering, but it doesn't stop with the Jews. So from that first map where you could see where the tribes were and where Canaan was, Jerusalem is not really at Jerusalem on this map. But the first exiles were in ancient times. The first one was the Babylonian exile, which is present-day Iraq. And you can see that even from there, the Jewish population is scattering into Europe, into Asia, into Egypt, and would continue into North Africa. There was a Moroccan Jewish community that was about 3,000 years old. So bringing this forward a little bit, I wanted to show when we got here for the first time, when Jews crossed the Atlantic. And it begins with the expulsion from Spain. I'm going to talk about other expulsions inside Europe. And here you see only part of the migratory path of Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews are Jews from Spain. And they came to this hemisphere. And the first Jews who came to what is now the United States came through this migration path. And I looked to see if people from this migration came to Alabama. I didn't see it. We have other experts in the room. What I saw was that the first Jews in Alabama were the German Jewish immigrants who came a little bit later. Well, a lot later than 1492, but a little bit later than most of the Sephardic Jews came. So I always like to show how did we even get here in our wandering around the world. But this is really what's happening in Europe. These are the medieval exiles. So in England, the Jews were expelled, from France, from all of these places. I like that this map shows that from Spain and Portugal, a lot of Jews went to North Africa and into the Middle East. That's really significant in our history because there were already a lot of Jews in North Africa and the Middle East who hadn't gone that far when they were expelled. But when the Sephardim came, Sephardim is plural, of Sephardi, they became the dominant culture very quickly. So they brought a culture of learning. It was the culture from Spain. So a lot of great works were preserved in that place. The Ottoman Empire welcomed Jews from Spain. They had space and jobs. They also collected a tax from religious minorities to practice their religions. But it became a place, some say the golden age of Sephardic Jews in the Ottoman Empire. So, I mean, we can talk about, built into the story of where Jews were is the story of the downfall of the Ottoman Empire and the end of the dominance of the Sephardic Jews in this period of time. So we're talking about 1492 is the expulsion. This lasts until into the 1700s. And there were relationships between the Sephardic Jews who were in the Middle East and the Sephardic Jews who went to the Netherlands, which is not indicated on here. There was a large Sephardic community in the Netherlands, and that relationship was a business relationship. This is about the movement of money, of business, and that was really the center of the Jewish world in that way, is in North Africa and the Middle East. That's pretty interesting, I think. It's not how we think about it. But what's happening inside Europe, I'm showing this map in part because you can already see movement toward Poland. Can everyone see that? I don't think I have a laser. Poland welcomed Jews, invited Jews to come. So Jews in Poland have a 1,000-year history. And if you're ever in Warsaw and have a chance to see the Polin Museum, I highly recommend it. Dan is nodding. We were there together.
Yes, I've been there.
I practically had to be carried out of that museum. It is so moving and so beautiful. And so that's the reason that millions of Jews were in Poland and were also moved toward what would become the Russian Empire, which I feel like is emerging as the villain of the story. So with the expansion of the Russian Empire, you also begin to see the decline of the Ottoman Empire, the decline of those trade routes, and the decline of the dominance of the Sephardic Jews. Also, as the Russian Empire expanded, came into a lot of territory where Jews lived, and Jews were made to live in the Russian Pale. A Pale is a word that is synonymous with the word ghetto. So Jewish ghettos were all over Europe. This is basically an enormous ghetto. This is the whole western border of the Russian Empire. I've marked some cities here that you may be familiar with. We've all heard about Kyiv quite a lot in recent years, but this included some of what are now Eastern Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, Ukraine, Moldova, on and on, are all in this large territory.
What?
Thank you, I love it. It was formed in 1790, 1791 by Catherine the Great, which coincided with the same time that Jews gained citizenship in France, which is then part of the movement to create a new anti-Semitism. But here, Jews did not become citizens until 1914. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about what's happening at the same time and where. So this area is the source of the largest wave of Jewish immigration that came to the United States, and including everyone from my family. That's what that looked like. So I always, it became a joke how much I love this graphic in this map. I showed it. So mine is prettier. I got it. Shows nearly 2 million people came to this hemisphere from the Russian Pale. And when I talked about this last night, I think most of the people in the audience confirmed that their families came from there. So it's the largest wave. And it lasted from about 1880 to 1924. This was not the first wave. This was not the wave that brought Jews to Alabama, although many would have come from this wave, but it was the earlier German Jewish immigrants who came to Alabama. Looking at Dan.
Would that be 1848, basically?
I mean, yes, and even earlier,
Okay.
but that's about right. I mean, it's about 40 to 50 years gap between the major wave of German Jewish immigrants and this large wave of, we'll call them Russian Jewish from the Russian Empire. So as a result, there are as many Jewish people as there are in the United States. Most of us descend from that wave of immigration. I think it's also part of the reason that when people think of a Jewish person, their first association is whiteness. We came from Europe. We were in most cases not citizens in Europe. When the war in Ukraine began, a number of Jewish people were posting, my family is Ukrainian. I'm thinking you would not have been Ukrainian in Ukraine, you would have been Jewish. This is something, when you learn this history, that's what it was. So people left the Pale for opportunity. The Pale is also where you had frequent pogroms, frequent outbursts of violence against the Jewish community. So people left for both reasons. Does anyone in here teach about the Holocaust?
Indirectly.
So when I've taught about the Holocaust, there's always the student who asks, why didn't the Jews just leave? And it's always phrased that way. It's always, why didn't they just leave? Like it was going to be a really easy thing to do. So some did leave, but it was very difficult. So I want you to look again, this map, where we have well over 2 million people leaving the Russian Pale. And this map, where to the United States you have 90,000. And that's the largest number on this map. So by this point, most places would not accept Jewish immigrants. And 1924 is the cutoff of that large wave of immigration because the immigration laws changed here. And it was then done by nation of origin. And there were very, very few seats. Certain parts of Europe were prioritized. It became very hard to come here. You needed to have someone who was your sponsor. So people were able to come to the United States, but not very many. Certainly not nearly as many people who were really fleeing for their lives and needed a place of shelter. But I was also thinking, when people were very upset yesterday, that there are some spots of light here that I can highlight. And I was thinking about, from Germany, a number of prominent professors, academics, and were able to come to the United States from Nazi Germany to teach at HBCUs. So, all over the South, mainly Jewish intellectuals were able to find a place to come and come to safety. So while a number of Jews left Germany and were able to come to the United States or other places, many left and stayed inside of Europe. So I'm from the Anne Frank Center USA, so I think about the story of Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father, and his family. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. First of all, one thing that happens with Anne Frank's story is sometimes her story is universalized. And students will learn that Anne Frank came from an assimilated Jewish family and that they were secular. Not really true, although her father and her uncle fought in World War I for Germany. And there's pictures of them in uniform, decorated veterans of World War I. Very strongly German identified. The family came from Frankfurt. I work with a woman who does German Jewish genealogy, and she has traced them back to the 1300s. They were there a long time. Yet, they all knew they had to leave. So this is a story of a Jewish family that did leave when they had the opportunity, and those opportunities were before the rise of the Nazis in 1933. His sister and brother-in-law and mother were in Switzerland. That's Lenny and Alice. His brothers, Robert and Herbert, went to England and to France, and Otto, as we know, tragically went to Amsterdam. The Netherlands were neutral in World War I. He believed that he was going to a safe place. So if you ever wondered, why did he go there? That's why. He had a job there. He believed the family would be safe there. So as a result of these choices of the places where they went, where they were able to go, everyone survived. So everyone that you see on this map, Otto Frank, his 3 siblings, even his mother, who was in her 80s, survived. The only people in the family who were killed in the Holocaust were Anne and Margot and their mother, Edith. And look at a huge family tree. So that brings me to what I'm calling the devastation of the Holocaust, because everybody learns about the Holocaust now, at least I hope they do. They learn something from that. I always define it so you know what I'm talking about. Systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime, its allies, and collaborators. One thing that people don't talk about very much, we hear 6 million, but we don't learn what the Jewish population of Europe was. So we don't understand the extent of the loss that is in that number, 6 million. So there were about 9 million Jews in Europe, 1933. So 6 million of 9 million were killed in the Holocaust. So when I'm teaching this to students, I say, I have 2 sisters, so there are 3 of us. 2 of us would be gone. This was completely devastating. To the world's Jewish population, it was a 40% loss. And in 2026, the number of Jews in the world has not caught up to what the number was before the Holocaust. So if anyone has ever asked, or you've heard anyone ask, why are Jews always talking about the Holocaust? There you go. And the other thing is, from that large wave of immigration, the Jews who were here in the United States were losing siblings, grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, and could do nothing to stop it. So in all of our wandering and in our exile, these are all of the places where Jews lived in the world. And this map could be a class in and of itself, because it talks about the different ways of being Jewish, from being Ashkenazi to Mizrahi to Sephardi. And I think it's pretty incredible. Here's where we are now. I think this is the map that doesn't have a number on Israel, so pardon me for that. Oh no, it does, 45.9. This is where we are now. And I'm missing one map, which shows that after World War II, with the establishment of Israel, the Jews who had lived in North Africa and the Middle East, some for thousands of years, I mentioned the Jewish community in Morocco, were no longer safe in the places they had lived for millennia. And so they too, about 800,000 of them, went to Israel. And somebody asked me, they decided they wanted to go to Israel? I said, you've not been listening to me. No, they were forced out, and that's where they could go. So this is the story of where we are now. And when I get to this point in the talk, I'm always amazed that we're still here. I feel like it's a miracle that any Jew has survived and that we're still here. So I feel a lot of gratitude when I reach this point. So I want to close on a slightly different point. I did not need my notes at all. Where we began was that anti-Semitism has been so hard to counter because it's hard to define and people don't believe it's real. The way that I always used to hear about it, and I have to say, I grew up in a time when I did not face, I would have said I never faced anti-Semitism, but for maybe one time then. So for a lot of people, it's been really jarring to see this increasing anti-Semitism all around us. We weren't ready for it. So we used to always say about anti-Semitism, I know it when I see it. And that was how we understood it. But that's just, it's not good enough if many people don't see it at all. So I have been thinking a lot about the world since October 7th, and facts have lost meaning. They've lost a social media battle. And I kept thinking, as I said, even the day after that horrible attack, that this is dehumanization in practice. We learn a lot about dehumanization, but to actually see it happening is pretty shocking. And to be part of the group that's being dehumanized is a pretty shocking experience for me. I've been very lucky. I didn't have to deal with that. So this is why I invented the word I already told you, rehumanization. We need to rehumanize. So this is how I'm thinking about it. I'm going to share my concept. I haven't talked about this very much, so I want to hear from you if you think this doesn't work or this is ridiculous or you think something that you get behind. I would say that rehumanization begins with history, and that's why I just shared this long history with all of you. And not a talking point, but as an active practice, as a real interest in knowing our history, knowing other people's histories. I have historians here. I hope that you love to hear it. We need to know our history, and we need to think about it as a way that we can understand our present in an active way. So I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm thinking about Holocaust education and why we've been attacked because we haven't ended anti-Semitism, when that's not what we were trying to do. So I think the opportunity to know each other is what is needed. The interest in knowing each other, knowing our stories. To teach Jewish history, honestly, in all of its complexity. We don't like complexity so much, but if we can restore that complexity and understand Jews as a moving and wandering people, a people of exile, of perpetual exile, wherever we lived, I think it explains why a Jewish person might not feel safe right now. And if I said, I don't feel safe, people would think, some people would think that's totally ridiculous. I hope that you all can understand why I might feel that way now, even if I didn't feel that way in the past. Rehumanization also requires moral clarity. We need to see all people as human. We need to stop the, but what about? That's like the knee-jerk reaction if we hear about anything that's happened to someone that we don't really identify with. So we have to reject the idea that somehow anti-Semitism is acceptable if it's in this certain situation, or if here's what we're talking about. We can see everybody as human in a situation. We don't need to pick who gets to be human. But there's a third reason that anti-Semitism is so hard to counter, and I'm going to close with this. And especially now it is an issue, and it's social media. Anti-Semitism is proliferating on social media, and it's come in the form of neo-Nazi propaganda. I have a good friend who's doing all of this research now, has found endless neo-Nazi propaganda in Instagram Reels especially. Social media companies are really not able to control it. At one point, they could control blatant Holocaust denial. They would catch it. But they're not good at catching anything that requires knowledge of a certain vocabulary or symbol or song. So it's very, very hard to respond to this. I would say that we've lost a social media battle after October 7th. It's not going to be easy to win this one, but we have to try. So the Anne Frank Center USA, which I am quite honored to be the CEO, we are launching new Anne Frank social media accounts. We can do it in the timeline I'm hoping for. They will launch June 12th, which would have been Anne Frank's birthday, be her 97th birthday in 2026. We're going to launch engaging content. We will direct people to reliable resources about the Holocaust. We will encourage communication. And when the hate comes, which surely it will, we will be able to report those accounts to the social media companies and actually shut them down. So it'll be a twofold purpose. And nobody else is doing this right now. So it's very important that somebody do it, and we're going to. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks said, hate that begins with the Jews never ends there. Many of you have probably heard that before, but maybe not. And I think of the Tree of Life attack, which was 2 miles from my house and included people I knew. But I also think about the Walmart in El Paso, top supermarket in Buffalo, attacks on other groups that were motivated by an anti-Semitic worldview. So I thank you. I invite you to learn more about the Anne Frank Center's approach to education in schools and communities. I hope that by being here this week, we can get some things started. Spoiler alert, you're all going to hear about that. As Rabbi Hillel said in the Pirkei Avot, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So I'll ask all of you, if not now, when? Comments?
How would you go about advising somebody who hears anti-Semitism in spaces like this for this program? How would you go about helping somebody address that virtually?
So it's a couple of answers. I don't know what the context is. I mean, sometimes when you're hearing an anti-Semitic comment, you're in an unsafe environment. In which case, as much as I would love for you to take that on, I would say, think about your safety first. And fight that battle another day. If you are in an environment where you can have a conversation, then you can say, can we talk about that? Here's what really happened. I mean, the more you know, the more you can enter into that conversation. It has to be calm. I mean, not everyone is ready to have that conversation, but a lot of people just don't know. A lot of people, their intentions are not bad. If they can learn, can turn it around. So that's what I think. Yes.
Can you explain the concept of Zionism?
Do we have 2 weeks? So I'll tell you what I think Zionism is. Zionism is the belief of Jews to have sovereignty in their ancestral homeland. The Zionist movement began as a religious movement and didn't really become popular. It was in the Russian Empire, actually. Did not become a popular movement until the 1890s, when the idea was embraced by a journalist, Theodor Herzl, and he began to gain support for the idea. He convened the World Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. I got to stand in that hall, that theater, that concert hall where it happened. And that was the beginning of it. And it was the idea that Jews were not safe in Europe. So we're talking about 1890s. Jews were not safe in Europe and needed a homeland of their own. There were a lot of debates about where that homeland should be because this was not a religious movement at this point. The people who were connected to the land of Israel through the scripture, and certainly it's all over the place if you're in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, we yearn for a return to Zion. It was decided that it had to be where Israel is now. That became the popular place. Now, that's what it means. That is the original factual true meaning of what Zionism is. Now, people think it means different things. So I've heard some people, well-intentioned, well-informed, educated people say that they think Zionism means you want to kill all Palestinians. Has anyone heard that? I mean,
Yeah, it's really
yes,
good.
people are nodding their heads though. People have heard it. That is not Zionism. Zionism, I wanted to change the word. You're learning, I like to make up words. I thought this word no longer serves us because it's become an excuse for anti-Semitism to say that a person is anti-Zionist. If you're anti-Zionist, you're saying Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Through this talk, you all know half of the world's Jews live in Israel. Where are they going to go? I mean, do you have any sense from this talk that someone's going to say, welcome? No, wouldn't happen, right? So I thought this word doesn't serve us anymore. I want to call it something else. Well, rabbis really hate that idea. because they are attached to what's in the scripture. But I said, I would like to rebrand this as the Jewish Search for Safety. Because that's what it was. It hasn't taken off yet.
In terms of the exile and migration, how significant was the expulsion from Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans?
You could see on that one map that it begins the scattering. Very significant. And after that is when Jews start to come into Europe. Absolutely. It sets us off to all of the places where we would end up.
Did more Jews settle into South America and then later move to other areas? Because there's a small percentage now.
So yes, there still are Jewish communities in some major cities in South America. And even in Anne Frank Center in Argentina. But a lot of the Jews in South America went there. They were able to go there from Nazi Germany, and many went after. But as you saw from the map from the expulsion from Spain, there were also Sephardic Jews who in 1492, this is why with Columbus, there were always rumors that he sailed with Jews or he had a connection to the Jews, that it was happening at the same exact time. There are Jewish communities in Mexico that have been there 500 plus years. So there was already a Central and South American Jewish population.
Not to mention Mexico's president.
Not to mention Mexico's president.
Just a point, there is a Sephardic community in Alabama, and it's located in Montgomery. They didn't come directly from Spain. They actually went to the Middle East, specifically the island of Rhodes. And in 1905 is when they migrated here.
So I did see that in my research, and I think that's amazing. Rhodes had a tiny but ancient Jewish community, speaking of that expulsion under the Romans. I think that there were 17 survivors from Rhodes after the Holocaust.
So in virtually every family, the Sephardic family in Montgomery lost someone.
Yeah.
In the Holocaust.
That's what that means. It's exactly what that means.
What's the top cultural misconception that you encountered about like Jewish culture and not necessarily just the Holocaust, but just about like your identity as a Jewish person?
There's so many, but I think to pick a top one, I'll say the things that I think are most commonly said. I think of like the phrase "Jew me down" or "Jewed him down." You know, there's always an association with money. I think is probably the top thing. But when I was an undergraduate at the University of Texas, I met someone who asked me if I worship the devil. I know people who were asked, "Where are your horns?" I think in culture, the most common misconceptions have to do with money. And when I was running the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, we were next door to a kosher food pantry that served entirely Jewish clientele. So the concept that Jews are rich and are controlling the world is just false.
If somebody wanted to do their own independent research on personal family Jewish history, how would you recommend doing that?
I love this question. When I conclude, I have a business card that's on a QR code on my phone. Please come and scan it if you want to keep in touch. But let's keep in touch because I have a person who can really help you out. Yeah, I met a woman at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. They said, before I met her, they said she's a savant. What that meant was she understands how to get the records from the Russian Pale, which I thought were gone. I always said, I'll never know. And my husband would say, you can find out. He was really frustrated with me. And I met her and she located the part of my family that I didn't know where they were in Europe before they came to the United States. She found them in 5 minutes.
Wow.
Yes.
What are the common relationships do you think that like Jewish people have like around the world from being now from like different cultures and being spread out? Is there a lot of like communication like really between like each other when it comes to like being from Australia, like all the way from the United States? Is there like good relationships you would say for the most part?
I would say yes. And part of that is the later migratory pattern. So a lot of the Jews who were in Australia had a very large population of Holocaust survivors. So I don't have a map of where survivors went after the Holocaust. But many came to the United States, many went to Australia. So you end up with a similar culture with some of the Jewish communities that are in different parts of the world. That's actually what this map is showing, which I said this map could be a class. This is showing what the cultures are. So you can even see from North America to Australia, same Jewish culture. It's a great question. Even for people who come from different Jewish cultures, we have similar religious practices. We might have a different tunes, different melodies, different foods, because our foods often follow the foods where we lived. You could go to a synagogue anywhere and it's the same service.
In the same vein, could you comment on the relationship between Jewish diaspora and Israel right now? Because from what I understand, there's some discrepancies.
That's complicated.
Yes, it is a complicated, yeah.
So diaspora, specifically diaspora means that your community is outside of Israel. So the Jewish people who are in Israel are the anti-diaspora, I'll just put it that way. And would believe that any Jew anywhere else should be in Israel. Right, and I mean, in the United States, the Jewish community, actually, thank you for asking this question because this is my dissertation.
It's a tough one.
But it's my dissertation research from a long time ago that I don't usually get to refer back to. But I mentioned in the question about Zionism that there was an argument about where the Jewish homeland should be between people who were more religious Zionist and people who just wanted to save place. There was a debate during World War II among Jews in the United States. And there was a group of Jews who were anti-Zionist. And what that meant at the time was that they didn't want the Jewish homeland to be where it is now. They thought all of the Jews should be able to come to the United States. And these were the Jews I'm talking about were Holocaust survivors. And that was a powerful movement, but it lost out to the more powerful movement that wanted the homeland in Israel. So I think there's always that tension. There's a lot of support for Israel among Jews in the United States, but it's a contested topic at this point, and it's generational, but it's also geographic. So where I'm from in Pittsburgh was always a very Zionist Jewish community. And that lasted definitely through my generation and maybe not lasting as much through Gen Z, say millennials, Gen Z, are questioning more. They're more of why is all of this happening there? And they're not doing it because I want it. It's complicated.
You can't really talk about a Jewish, you have to talk about communities, because that gets into anti-Zionism or non-Zionism. And, you know, it was the earlier German Jews that had come that were the non or anti-Zionist really until after World War II, until after the Holocaust.
Indeed, the head of that organization was named Lessing Rosenwald. And while we're here, I want to go see a Rosenwald school. So we're going to do that tomorrow. And so Lessing was the son of Julius Rosenwald, who built the Rosenwald schools across the South. And he was the head of the organization that wanted the Jews to come to the United States. So by marriage, I'm related to that family. And my grandmother, my father even knew Lessing Rosenwald, you know, when my father was a little boy. So I called my grandmother's brother who married a Rosenwald, and I said, I'm researching this. I need to know about it. And my great uncle was probably 95 at the time, and he didn't want to talk about that. So I called my grandmother, and she said, my grandmother of blessed memory, she said, anytime she drove around the United States, she would think we didn't have room for 6 million. She said Lessing Rosenwald was a good man. So that's That's what I have to say about that. It's true. But definitely it was the German Jews who came before the Jews from the Russian Pale. But the Russian Pale is where the Zionist idea really first flourished before it was picked up in Central and Western Europe.
I just have a comment. Kristen, I want to say thank you. The Jewish people, through all of this wandering, kept the Bible intact, kept the feasts intact. And, we're just scratching the surface of knowing how those roots have impacted our faith. And I'm sorry to say that as a child, I was taught in church, don't worry about that. That's Old Testament. And that I know now is an anti-Semitic viewpoint. It really is. And so I just want to say thank you. And I'm so grateful for this.
Kind of going off of that, actually, what do you see any particular correlation in the United States between essentially between Christianity and anti-Semitism, particularly possibly Protestant Christianity and anti-Semitism? Is there any correlation you see from history in the United States?
Did you say Protestant? Anti-Semitism was built into the early teachings of Christianity. It was. So that connection is definitely there.
Is this where the roots of anti-Judaism begin, would you say?
Yes.
Not earlier, not prior to
There are hints
the
of it.
rise of this new monotheistic religion.
Well, and Jews don't proselytize, so I mean, and Jews wanted to stay Jewish.
Yep.
And I think that was very hard for anyone to understand, and that sets up the beginning of anti-Semitism. Even I didn't talk very much about Jews living under Islam, but that's a large part of the story. And in a sort of second iteration of this, which I don't give that often, I have more about the Middle East and more about Muslim rule in Spain and how that contributed to the survival of some of our holy texts. All kinds of things came out of that chapter. But the history of the intersection of Judaism and Islam is as interesting.
And you mentioned the Ottoman Empire being quite tolerant. I mean, so that is another layer of the migration and wandering, right?
It is, that was a safe place for European Jews for 500 years.
Istanbul in itself, yeah.
How big of a role do you see the Israel-Palestinian struggle keeping anti-Semitism stirred up around the world?
I think what we're seeing right now is very much related to that and is related to the propaganda that has come out of that event.
Also the dehumanization that you mentioned, right? I mean, they're so connected. So
Dehumanization is behind this whole story.
Argue that dehumanization on both sides.
I think that, I mean, absolutely.
Like, in some capacity, everyone in that region, whether they're Israelis in Israel or Palestinians in Palestine, they're suffering. Some to obviously more sense than others, but everyone in that region in some capacity is struggling right now.
We have to be able to see everyone as human.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm curious, have you ever seen the art exhibit? I think it was called From Darkness into Light, but it was about the Holocaust. And it came to Troy about 10 or 15
You'll
years
see,
ago.
you'll see it in Birmingham.
Oh, good.
Okay.
It's at
It's
the Holocaust Center.
beautiful. It's a permanent exhibit.
It is
there?
now, yes.
Okay.
And there is a traveling exhibit, but
Yes,
we'll go to the center on Thursday and you'll see it.
Great.
thank you.
I don't think I have seen it, so I'll see it Thursday. breaking things.
The last question, maybe, or not the last, sorry, I don't mean to, but when is it early, when is it too early to teach about anti-Semitism? Or not early enough, too late, or like early enough? Because those are very, very difficult topics, especially when it comes to the home. So.
So we talked about that a little bit last night,
Mhm.
and I have strong opinions. But what I did is I went to some wonderful elementary educators I know, and I asked them that question. What is too young?
Yes, too young, right?
Because it was, just as an aside, always believed in this field that it is too terrible to teach. Even when we started to teach it in 6th grade, there were people who said it's too young, shouldn't be before high school, shouldn't be before college. To which I said, terrible things are happening all around us and our children live in this world. So, I mean, we need to figure this out. So I went to this wonderful educator and I said, what's too young? And his response was, we teach about slavery in 2nd grade. And it makes me think that by believing that teaching the Holocaust is more horrible than teaching other horrible things, we're already making a separation
Right.
between our stories. And it makes it very hard to make the connections on a human level that I'm really hoping everybody will make. So we're working now. Anne Frank Center has one program that's a performance called Conversations with Anne, 25 minutes. It's based on the diary, about 4% of the diary. And at the end of the performance, the actor stays in character as Anne and takes questions from the audience.
Interesting.
We
Yeah,
do
so
that
that's
for
a-
4th grade.
So that's a good way to introduce.
I was trying to think of when I first read that. It wasn't 4th grade, but that would work.
Learning about it in our World War II unit, big World War II unit. Okay, 6th grade. We each had to pick 2 different books on the Holocaust to do reports on. We saw documentaries on it. That's when I first started becoming more self-aware that, these are one of my people. It was jarring to see, like, because I was the only one able to empathize because I was the only partly Jewish kid in the room. I'm not even full Jewish, just quarter.
But I hear that's a lot of your identity, though, that you're really interested in it.
I for sure am.
That's great. Yeah. So another thing that we think about in relation to what you're talking about is if we're presenting this to Jewish children and all that they're learning that's connected to anything Jewish is about the Holocaust, then there's an issue there. And I mean, I've felt this way for a long time. There has to be more. It can't be the only thing that we teach about what it is to be Jewish. It can't be this. And across this timeline that I shared with you, there are episodes of horrible things happening to Jewish people throughout that timeline. It's the Holocaust we know because it was so well documented. And it happened in the most advanced country in Europe. It was the start of it, and for all of these reasons. But this is a feature of Jewish history across these thousands of years. It wasn't a new thing when the Holocaust happened. So, I mean, we could teach more broadly about this if we're teaching Jewish history, but we could also teach more about positive things in Jewish experience. And even though I'm at the Anne Frank Center and it's the story of a victim of the Holocaust, she wrote so beautifully. She was so alive. She was so resilient in what she wrote. There are things that we could take from that to tell a more positive Jewish story. And that's part of it.
I taught a class here on campus a number of years ago. It included a lot of this type of information, but one of the things that I discovered that I didn't realize, and when I would present it, my students were just blown away, and that is, we don't understand how much Western culture has benefited. If you simply look at a statistic like, 21% of all Nobel Prizes were given to Jewish recipients, which are 0.0% of the population. I mean, it's an insane statistic, and a listing of all of the commonly known entertainers, creators, artists, writers. And we don't focus on that. And I think some of that is in an effort to we don't want to call out any one race or any one group of people, but we miss that very important thing. So therefore, whenever all the negative stuff's coming out, it just all ends up being negative. It's like, whoa, hang on. We wouldn't be who we are right now without the influence of, especially in the arts. And well, science, I mean, it's all over, art, sciences, I mean, everybody's medicine, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So I would highlight that with my students. They'd be like, wow, I didn't know he was Jewish.
I love things I've never researched myself. When I was curious when I literally Googled Jewish celebrities, and I realized how many musicians that I actively listen to.
It's amazing.
I remember calling my dad so excited, "Did you know Billy Joel was Jewish?" And laughing. He's like, "Yeah, I knew."
So any more questions or thoughts before we conclude? Thank you all so much.
Thank you.